Alrighty, kitchen table wargamers. I'm gonna come back now for this is, I guess we'll call this part 2 of codices, if you will. Want to talk about data sheets and points, because I did not mention the points in the last video when I talked about the Codex, but I was doing that for a reason. So I'm gonna open the Codex. I'm skipping through all the beginning stuff. I've already kind of talked about it and heading directly over to some data sheets so we can talk about what you will find in a data sheet. This is something that for me, it's kind of intuitive, but then there's levels and layers on top of layers. And so I want to point out a few things, and some of this will make a lot more sense when we actually break it down and do a gameplay video. So we'll just look at the Grandmaster. He is here. He's a generic commander choice or HQ choice that you can add to your army. All of the HQ choices will have this skull symbol. It's like a skull in a box, framed skull, whatever you can see up there. Voldus, he's got the same one. Grandmaster Voldus is a named character, so he has some other restrictions. Mainly, he has a chosen or given warlord trait if you use him as your warlord. So back to the data sheets. You'll have the name of the unit up here, Grandmaster. It's an HQ choice. We know that by looking at the symbol there. And this is the stats or data sheet points of interest, I guess. You've got your movement allowance. So the M stands for movement. He can move 5 inches at a time. He has a weapon skill. WS is weapon skill of 2+. So normally, if he is in melee, because weapon skill applies only to melee, he will hit on a 2+. So you just roll a dice. As long as you have a 2 or higher showing, then it will cause a hit. That does not necessarily cause a wound, and we'll discuss that more in gameplay, but it hits on a 2+. His ballistic skill, that's what BS is 2+ as well. Characters are generally going to have better weapon skill and ballistic skill. There are some exceptions. Strength characteristic, his strength is 4. Toughness characteristic, his toughness is 4. He does have 6 wounds. That's what the W is for, 6 wounds. He gets 6 attacks, which if you're not familiar with Warhammer, 6 attacks is a pretty decent amount because this is just the number he gets standard. There are other armies with other ways of increasing the number of attacks that a model can have, but for a character, that's a pretty large number of attacks. His leadership is 9. That comes into play at some other points in the game, and we'll discuss those when we get there. And then he has a save value of 2+, which when we start talking about saves, wounds, etc., we'll go over this stuff in a little more detail and show you how that save value is impacted, but that'll be more for the gameplay itself. Just for now, you know that every character and unit in the game has a stat sheet like this, where you'll always find movement, weapon skills, etc. The next thing you'll find when you're looking through the Codex is it's going to have a line right here that describes what that character is equipped with. He is, if you just run him as the standard build, he has a Mastercrafted Stormbolter, a Nemesis Force Halberd, frag grenades, and crack grenades. This then gives you the weapon profiles. So his Mastercrafted Stormbolter has a range of 24 inches, has a rapid fire 2. We'll discuss rapid fire and the different types. There's assault and rapid fire, a variety of different weapon types. We'll discuss that in another video. The short and sweet is, if it's rapid fire, if you are within half range with that weapon, then you would double the number of shots. So instead of firing 2 shots, you would fire 4 shots. And rapid fire, if you're within 12 inches of your target. That's what that means. So normally, if you're outside of that 12 inches, it would be 2 shots. If you're within the 12, then it becomes 4. Strength 4 gun. So again, we'll talk about how you apply wounds to toughness and strength, etc. This does have -1 of an AP, which stands for armor penetration, and it has a damage characteristic of 2. And again, we'll get into what all of these things mean in the gameplay in another video. His Nemesis Force Halberd, you see that it is characterized or range as melee or melee. Type is melee as well. That just means you can't shoot it, right? It's a halberd. It's a hand-to-hand weapon. You don't shoot those. There are a few special weapons in the game that are kind of both. So you can shoot with a melee weapon, but it's not very common. The melee Force Halberd melee weapon has a strength characteristic of +2. So to figure out what the strength is, you check this unit's strength, which is 4. You add 2. So this weapon profile becomes a strength total of 6. It has an armor penetration characteristic of -2, and it causes 2 damage on anything that is not saved. So this +2 you add to your strength thing, I didn't quite get that the first couple of times that my buddies and I were playing it, and we had to really do a lot of reading and sorting. So that's just one of those little things I thought might help some folks. So the next thing to note in your codex, or if you're looking at a data sheet, you're going to have war gear options for almost every unit. This particular model can trade or exchange his Force Halberd with one weapon from the melee weapons list. So where would you find? And then it also says he could exchange his Storm Bolter for one weapon from the special weapons. So to find that list of things, it's going to be located in the front, or it used to be. Let's see if it still is. Nope, it's not listed in the front like it used to be. It used to show up right over here where it talked about abilities and war gear options. But there is a note that says all other weapons can be found on page 104 through 107. If you are looking for one or more weapon lists, melee weapons, these can be found on page 104. So we'll just flip there real quick. Always gets to read the codex. That was an adjustment that I didn't realize they had made in the new book. Here we go. So when I look at his weapon gear options, it says that I could exchange his halberd for another melee weapon. So any of these on the list are fair game for him. You could, instead of modeling him or building him with a halberd, you could give him a sword, the warding stave, 2 falchions, 1 in each hand, or the demon hammer. And then for his mastercrafted storm bolter, you could replace it with special weapons. So that means he could carry an incinerator, a silencer, or a psi cannon. This is also where you would find the definitions for terms. Nemesis weapons. There are some things with the Grey Knights that the term nemesis weapon or psi weapon causes some bonuses if you're using combinations of things. So you want to know what qualifies as that. And in a lot of armies, they'll have special rules for special weapons, and you'll find it in a place similar to this. So it would be at the end of the codex, right before you find all the points. They do nicely provide pictures of the heavy weapons or the 3 special weapons there. You do notice there's combi weapons listed. I think we have 1 unit, the librarian, who can take a combi weapon, and these are the 3 that are available to him. But he's in a unique position for a variety of reasons. But just know, this is where you'll find that. So back on page 104. And there's some descriptions about what a bolt weapon is, a flame weapon, etc., etc. So back to the data sheet. A couple more things to point out for his data sheet. So that was war gear options. Then you have abilities. The abilities, if it's in that bold print, Knights of Titan, Teleport Strike, those are just a baked-in ability that most of the Grey Knights will have. Knights of Titan refers to your whole army being from one faction, Grey Knights, and then also being in the same detachments, having the same Brotherhood keyword. If you do, then they get certain abilities. So it's just saying that he qualifies as one of those units. Teleport Strike, for the Grey Knights, they're unique in that almost all the units can teleport strike, which means you could field when you start deploying, you could set them up not on the table and bring them in during turn 2. But we'll talk about that more when we deal with gameplay, game setup, deployments, things like that. The Iron Halo, this is an abilities. This is where you'll find some of the more confusing things sometimes, but also some of the really cool things that you need to know about. So the Iron Halo ability says that he has a 4-up invulnerable save. And again, when we spend time breaking down saves and wounds and armor and all those things, we'll discuss what invulnerable save means versus a regular save. And we'll get into some detail with that. Rites of Battle, this is saying it's an aura ability that while he's within 6 inches of any model that is also from the same Brotherhood, So the Grey Knights, you have 8 brotherhoods you can choose from. As long as he's the Grandmaster from the same brotherhood as a core unit, and you see core is highlighted there, then that model can reroll hits attacks of 1. So a 1 is always going to fail for things, but because of this aura that he gives, if he's within 6 inches of other units from the same brotherhood, they're allowed to reroll 1s. In 9th edition, they changed it. He cannot reroll 1s for himself anymore. He is not core. And you find that down here under faction keywords. He is Imperium, he is Sanctic Astartes, Grey Knights, and then whatever brotherhood he's a part of. And his keywords would be Infantry, Character, Psyker, Terminator, and Grandmaster. Core does not appear in the keywords for him, which is why he's not allowed to reroll his own 1s. The other thing to see is that for Psychers, it'll tell you as well what psychic powers or how many psychic powers they can know and how many they can attempt to perform in a game in a phase. So he can attempt to manifest 1 in the psychic phase. He can attempt to deny 1 in the opponent's psychic phase. He knows Smite already, and he can know 2 additional psychic powers. So he's gonna know 3 anytime during the game, but he's only allowed to cast 1 time. So, like many other things in Warhammer and 9th edition, you have to be strategic with how you use your models, what powers you give to them, where they're placed on the table, and what they do. And just to show you, there are differences. Kaldor Drago's sheet, he has similar thing. Well, he's not allowed, you'll see in other war gear, he is not allowed to change up his loadout, but he does have a special shield that gives him a 3-up invulnerable save. He has a couple of extra things. He's the Supreme Grandmaster. So any Grey Knight's character or core unit that is within 6 inches of him, in the next command phase, you can select that model and they will re-roll their hit roll in any attacks, which is really cool, but it's something you do at a certain time during the command phase. We'll talk about phases and other things at a later point. He does have the rights of battle, so if you're a core unit, and it doesn't matter what brotherhood it is for Drago, because he's the supreme commander of this group, or the supreme grandmaster, he just has to be within 6 inches and they can reroll 1s to hit. And there's the keywords down there. He also is able to cast 2 psychic powers and to deny 2 psychic powers. And he will actually be allowed to know 4, including Smite. So there's differences in every data sheet. Just wanting to look at those things with y'all. And then here's the last thing I wanted to point out. This is for a Grandmaster in Nemesis Dread Knight armor. So it's one of the guys in what we call the baby carrier. Any vehicle in the game that has a certain wounds characteristic, usually it's wounds of more than 9. So if it has 9 wounds or more, it's going to have a degradation chart. So as it gets injured and wounds get removed, it's going to become less able to do things. So this is just showing as long as he's at 7+ wounds, this will move 9 inches, has a weapon skill of 2, ballistic skill of 2. And you'll notice in red, they've highlighted what's going to change. So his movement will go down depending on how many wounds he has remaining. And his ballistic skill will also decrease based on the number of wounds he has left. Things that don't change, his strength will stay the same, toughness will stay the same, and then his attacks will also degrade as far as when he is in melee. The number of attacks will go down. Leadership doesn't change. His save characteristic does not change. You'll see that this is all it's equipped with to start with is 2 Dread Fists. But then when you look down at war gear options, you can equip with one of the following. You can replace a Dread Fist for a melee weapon. You can also give him a Dread Knight teleporter, etc. So just pointing out, there's different ways to build them. There's different weapon characteristics, and they show you these things. And then especially for vehicles, note that there is a difference in their move characteristics as they are injured or wounded. And then the very last thing I wanted to point out as far as data sheets, we talked about, there's a glossary back there at the back, talked a little bit about points and abilities. And when I was talking about this page in the book that shows special weapons, melee weapons, to the right of that, you've got a full list of all the weapons available to Grey Knights. These are all ranged attack weapons. And on this page, it continues with ranged weapons up to here, and then your melee weapons are here. These are all the weapons available to the Grey Knight's army, and it'll tell you all of their abilities, all of their ranges, all of the damage potentials, etc. And then some pictures of what those look like. And the final thing in the book that you want to know is the points values for everything. So every unit has points associated with it, and then it'll break down per cost per model. It'll tell you what those are. It'll tell you what the maximum size is, 5 to 10 models. We're looking at a strike squad, and these have the symbols here. So a troop has that triangle, elites have the skull and a cross kind of through it, fast attack is a lightning bolt. So each type of model or unit in here, it's going to show you the max size, 5 to 10 models, so no less than 5, no more than 10 in a unit. The cost per model. These two are the only weapons that cost a different point value when you build your list. So if you wanted to add in a psi cannon and remove one guy with a storm bolter, or replace a storm bolter or nemesis weapon, you would add 5 points to that guy. So he would go from being 22 points to that one unit or model would be 27 points. Same thing if you want to get rid of their normal weapons and melee weapons and give one of them a hammer, you would have to add 10 points. So 22 would become 32 points for that one model. And all of these things, this is just going to break down the points values for all those things. And any other things you can pay for, I mentioned in another look at the Codex, there's some bonuses you can give to certain characters, and there's the point values for those too. So when you're building an army, you have to build to a certain point limit. 500 points is what we'll go through in this video series. So this has been a look at your data sheets, what information is going to be available on the data sheets, and then also mentioning the points in the back, as well as your list of weapons that are available and any special rules that might apply to them. This one's a little bit longer, some hardcore information to try to get through and digest. So hopefully this stuff is helpful to folks. There's some things here that confused me to no end when I was starting, and I'm not spending a ton of time on the points because I'm going to show you an app that most Warhammer 40k fans use to build their armies. You can make a spreadsheet and put all your points values down into the spreadsheet and calculate everything that way, doing it by hand. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do that a lot of times for things that I'm still learning. But there's a great app that does that stuff for you. So I'll show you that in another video. Thanks again for tuning in. This has been Kitchen Table Wargaming with a look at the data sheets and the points values in your Codex.